Hi everyone, this is Dr. Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Posture. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone. Do you want to understand the connections of the horse's physical body to behaviours such as laziness, rushing, stumbling, shying or bracing? If so, join us in the Posture and Behaviour Masterclass. Is your horse misbehaving or communicating? In the masterclass, I explore the influence of core strength, postural stability and movement to behaviours that are often thought to be a training issue. A priority for horses is to feel safe and secure in your bodies. So join us on March the 18th for the Posture and Behaviour Masterclass. Awesome to see you today, Soph. This topic is actually a listener request. Thanks, Lily. It is a common presentation that we see, the pendulous abdomen.
Something that we discuss a lot in the equine functional posture course because it's a very important postural observation to be making, and it's also a strong indicator of core function. So if we start with, how would you describe what a big belly or pendulous belly looks like?
Yeah, it's generally a very wide and drop from behind, so you can generally see it from behind, and it looks bigger down lower than what it does up the top. And so also behind the girth line, the tummy just kind of drops down, so it doesn't flow from the girth line up towards the pubis. They can look quite saggy. Often the pelvis is also disengaged and it tips forward. And so, if you're familiar with looking at pelvic angles, then it'll look more flattened through the pelvis and the sacrum. Not always though. Occasionally you will get a horse that has a flexed pelvis and a big belly and they're just not, they lack function through their pelvis. It also drops at the back of the ribs in front of the pelvis, so it kind of has a bigger area in that drop of the belly. It also gets in the way of the stifles. And I also just wanted to comment before we move on that we have done 2 episodes on recognizing core function and developing core function. So this episode we're kind of discussing all the potential reasons for the pendulous belly. Obviously poor core function is a big one of those, but if you'd like to delve into that more from a structure and function perspective, then I'd recommend that you go back and listen to those previous episodes. So what kind of reasons might a horse have this kind of pendulous dropped belly? Sometimes it goes with a weak top line, but when they actually have good core function, you can still have a pendulous belly with a well-developed top line that's there because of other reasons. So what kind of reasons might it be that horses can have a pendulous belly?
So age, for one. Sometimes when they get a bit older and, you're losing strength or you're not doing as much movement, and lots of other reasons that come, with age. Maybe you're a bit stiff and so you don't, sort of pick yourself up and get going. Sometimes those horses look like they have a big belly and, and when we say pendulous, so you're thinking pendulum. So when you're talking about looking very wide and drop from behind, as they walk away from you, we're talking about a belly that kind of it almost looks like it's, like those grandfather clocks with the pendulums goes off to one side, down and back over to the other side, and come back. And so another reason for a pendulous belly might be like a hay belly. So here when you're talking about horses that still have a good enough top line, so we're not talking about, injuries to the core at that time, but or to the abdominals or strain or injury. But when you're talking about horses, have another reason for a pendulous belly. If they're eating a lot of hay and they've got a really big belly that kind of hangs down, and there have been horses that you see that have good quality, like a really good core function. And even when they're eating a lot of hay, they don't look like they have a big hay belly that's swinging side to side. So often in that case, it's a little bit of a combination factor. There might be a reason if they don't have a fantastic core strength, or if they're, like we were talking before about your internal organ function, for some reason, if maybe they're a little bit slow in their digestion as well. You end up with this really big hay belly. Other things there, when we're talking about internal organ function, parasite burden. I know this was very recent. I saw a foal with a huge belly and he got wormed and he just turned around so quickly, which is, it's quite recognized in foals, but even in older horses, sometimes when you've got a high worm burden and you do a worming, there's quite a big change in their tummy, even if you're not seeing it as strongly in the rest of the body, and their abdominal comfort changes as well, their sensitivity around the tummy. It's such a big change for them. So a parasite burden, just inflammation and a change in that internal organ function. On that line, sand is another big factor. Depends on where the listeners are, but right now we're in southeastern Australia and we've had quite a long period of patchy drought, but for the most part, a lot of horses have been in sandy paddocks and, they get a little bit of grass pick when there's rain, and then they are more likely to pick up dirt when they're trying to get that little bit of green pick on the ground, or maybe people are feeding hay, and of course, if it's on the ground, they're also going to pick up dirt. It's something that really stays. And if you aren't eating enough roughage, then you're not going to be clearing out all of that sand as well. So just considering all of those things that might be impacting your internal organ function. What other reasons sort of?
Yeah, I've seen a few with abdominal strain or injury, and this can go either way. It can be dropped in a different way, like the rectus abdominis, part of the belly can be lower, and or
Could you just rectus abdominis being
the underneath muscle at the very bottom. And so I've seen some where like they have a line and then the bottom part of the belly is dropped. But it could be, that they've done an abdominal strain injury and so they're not able to support their belly, and so it's dropped down because of that. Could also be like pelvic injury, kissing spine even can make the belly look quite large if they don't want to, like they don't have comfort through their back. So they're definitely important things. Another one is to look at hoof comfort and balance, because that's going to affect their general posture and how well their core is able to be supported. Also, like postpartum, so just, everything has slackened and relaxed. They've got a lot of oxytocin, different hormones in their system, and so it's affecting muscle tone and ligament tone and all of that. And especially if the horse, has been out of work for a long time before getting pregnant, or if they have other underlying like pelvic struggles or core struggles themselves, then postpartum can really show up their struggles with holding their belly up. And then another one is fat deposition. So like just being fat, and then not having good enough muscle support as well. Like, I've been called out in dissection before where I'm like, oh, this horse looks pretty skinny, and then we dissect them and they've got fat everywhere, because they've got underlying metabolic challenges. So sometimes, that fat deposition, I was listening to a podcast about female perimenopause the other day, and like it was talking about fat deposition around the belly related to hormonal changes and things. And so horses can get that too, but from like a metabolic perspective. So if they've got underlying Cushing's or insulin resistance, they can also get that big belly. And then poor quality fiber and not enough protein. So they're eating a lot of fiber, but they're not maybe able to digest it that well. And they're just not getting enough protein to support like muscle development. Jelly has a big belly commonly, and I think it's a combination of like he will clean up every little scrap, whereas Henry just doesn't. I think it's a combination of that, but I also have seen it change, in a day. Sometimes related to if I've done a psyllium clean out for sand, his belly shape changes. If his muscles are struggling, so because he has the underlying muscle disorder, myofibrillomyopathy, if his muscles are struggling, then often his belly looks larger. Or if he has discomfort in his body, for whatever reason, his belly looks larger. Whereas if he's kind of working and he's pretty comfortable in his body, then his belly looks more picked up. So it can be a product of, forelimb and hind limb function as well, leading to the abdominal area not being able to be supported because they have discomfort somewhere else in the body. So yeah, there's lots of reasons, and it's the same with everything we discuss, right? And I hope that it's something that you get out of listening to our podcast, is that there is generally not one reason for anything, and when someone says to you, oh yeah, that's such and such, every time I see that, it's such and such. Well, gosh, horses are still teaching me every day when I see a pattern and I think, oh yeah, I've got this pattern nailed. And then I'm like, oh, it's different in this horse. Like this is a different compensation pattern, or there's this injury on top of this injury, or we treat it a few times and then the whole picture changes and we're like, oh, okay, this is not what I thought was going on. So there's lots of reasons and we need to figure it out for the individual horse. So that's what we're trying to give you here. So what should it look like if we don't have a pendulous belly?
Balanced. So, pendulous belly is obviously something that sticks out because it doesn't fit with the rest of the picture, but having a balanced posture is what we're aiming for. So one observation that seems to really click for people is when you compare the top of the horse. So if you think about the outline of the horse, the top of the horse, so if you follow the line sort of from their wither down through their back and then back up to the pelvis, then comparing that to the underside of the horse and saying, do they match? Are they complementary to one another, or are they vastly different? Is the belly really hanging down in a different shape to the top? Does it kind of look like the length of, behind the horse's elbow, if you followed that outline underneath the belly up to the pelvis, does that look a lot longer, just visually compared to the top of the horse? And when you look at where it's really wide, you're talking about a wide, low belly as opposed to maybe a narrow and underdeveloped top line where maybe even the shelf of the ribs sometimes on some horses looks to be standing out with a great big belly hanging out underneath. So being able to say, do these complement one another? And even if you have a nice healthy back and a really big belly, then saying, okay, but we want them to be more matched, better matched, so that we know that the systems of the ventral line of the horse and the dorsal line of the horse are more balanced for function. You'd also want it to look engaged but not tucked up. I was just saying before that the other day I saw a beautiful belly that I was very impressed by, and it had a smooth transition from underneath the girth space coming back underneath the belly on the underside of the rib cage, and then it had a lovely soft curve coming up into the pelvis, and it looked like the horse would be able to breathe really nicely, not in a a stilted fashion or kind of a weak fashion, but just an easy way of going. It's nice to see a good quality back musculature as well on the horse. So if you have a wither pocket that is quite nice and full and that you still have good top line across, all the way between from in front of the wither, in front of the shoulder to the top of the croup. So it doesn't, you were saying before, you often get this kind of hollow shape over the lumbar that pulls into a hollow flank, and then the belly gets really big underneath it. But to be able to look like that space is not braced but full and healthy. Another thing that we're looking for is having a head and neck that are easily in neutral, because commonly with a big belly, you'll see a head that's either really high, they're kind of like holding it up, and they sort of look like they have a false U-neck. They're horses that probably wouldn't have that shape if they were healthier in front. Yeah, and nicer. Or they enter a trot and they might do something like immediately put their head down because they're just trying to find some way to brace their tummy. So or their head gets stuck out in a pointed position because they're just trying to hold it. So a neutral head and neck position is what we're looking for, and which is a good reminder of the fact that your head and neck position is a result of what's happening in the rest of the body. We would love to be able to see horses that can comfortably do a belly lift without having to brace, without having to drop the head and neck down, and also not give us a cranky response as well. And should look like wild horses. You're the one who introduced me to videos of the Koenigs when you were studying with Sharon May Davis, and just how well their belly integrates with the rest of the body. And I also have a Brumby in the paddock at the moment that I look at every day, and I'm like, wow, I just love the way that your whole body integrates with itself. So his belly, he wanders around and he'll nibble at trees, and he will, I see him put his head up and he'll pop it over Charlie's back, my other horse. He'll put his head over his back, but it never looks like, he never looks like a seesaw. It never looks like his head goes up and his belly goes down, or his belly goes up and his head goes down. He has, and when he trots, I've watched him, he can hold a beautiful barrel, pelvic, shoulder stability and move his head around to have a look. And I rode him, not yesterday, the day before in the evening. And when he travels in a straight line, we're going along the fence line, he just looks around and it doesn't feel like he's gone into a banana shape in a bend. And that was just bareback with a halter on, but it was just so I wasn't influencing him at all. He's a little bit fat. I was trying not to fall off. He's sleek and fat, but he just felt like he was holding himself nicely. So to be able to, those wild horses, the influence, we're going to talk a bit more about it, everything that variability of movement, exploration, curiosity, and varying terrains gives you, but wild horses, in the right conditions, have an incredible belly.
Yeah, and they can be fat, but they don't have a pendulous abdomen. So, that's the difference. Your horse can be fat, but still have a supported abdomen. So it's not always just because they're fat. So that's why you need to understand, I was treating a horse last year, and he is 17, and he had so much spinal dysfunction, and he had a big belly, and he's one that I talk about in the Posture and Behaviour Masterclass, because he had a big belly. Yep, he was getting a fair amount of hay at that point, but he also had no ability to do anything about that. He had no function, very limited function throughout his entire spine. He couldn't lift his back legs comfortably for the trimmer. He struggled to stand still. He was always moving. So his belly last time I saw him, his belly was in a much better position, not because of, because he could support it. And so, they can be fat, but you can still not have a pendulous abdomen if everything is healthy. So in the equine functional posture course, these are things that we help you to recognize, what is a well-supported abdomen? what is a not supported abdomen, what could be the underlying causes for your individual horse, rather than just a blanket approach. We also help you to practice that observation, because in the live Q&A sessions, you get to observe lots of horses and lots of feedback for individuals, as well as your own videos. You get to observe the feedback for other people. You also get to recognize how to improve that and get them more comfortable with mobilizations and movement, and bringing quality activations at the right interval. So you remind the body how to work well, promote good movement, and promote abdominal and belly control. So it actually becomes a movement pattern. So, this is an area that's a big focus in the equine functional posture course, and one of the areas that you gain kind of value in that. So, what are some things that people can do about it?
So, firstly, gut health. If we're talking about our internal organ function, again, coming back to comfort in the belly and also the health of that space. Fiber, the right fiber for your horse. So different types of fibers. Hay is very good, having good roughage traveling through the body, cleaning them out, feeding those good microbes, and a little bit of microbial support. So, that if your horse is going through a tough time, using a good quality microbial support and feeding those microbes. So, you want to those microbes to be populating and breeding. So feeding those ones, as well as making sure that your diet has what it needs. So we're talking about protein before, making sure there's enough of that, so that muscle function, making sure all of your amino acids are balanced. Otherwise, you just don't have muscle. There are limiting amino acids. And then parasite control. So making sure that you have timed your wormer at the end of the bot season to be, at the right point, so that you aren't going to have more bots after that point. You depending on your situation, you might need to do more or less regular fecal egg counts, but they're a great indicator to make sure that you either don't have a burden, and that you're also not overworming. Our nutritional podcast with Erica Goff. It's Erica Goff from
Inside Out
is really great. She did a great job of explaining that really simply, and it's definitely something that anybody could use. And then if you go back to your musculoskeletal system and looking at supporting the belly there, having body work done that looks at function. So being able to do an abdominal assessment to say, okay, this is how our core muscles feel. This is what they feel like. This is their tone. Can they engage, or is there something else going on that's getting in the way? You mentioned abdominal strains before. That's something, if you have a muscle that has a small injury, the body is like, we're not going to use that. It hurts. And that is there for a reason, because they're like, we want to protect that and make sure it doesn't develop any more issues. But there's a time when we need to say, okay, well, let's make that muscle comfortable again, because it's ready to start doing its fair share of the work and come back into the system to make it balanced again. So having a body worker who can do a structural assessment of your pelvic movement as well, to see if that's a factor, because your pelvic movement is part of the engagement of the belly. Making sure that you check on the diaphragm. That's a pretty big functional system that's actually smack bang in the middle of the belly, because it stretches from one side of the rib cage across to the other side of the rib cage, straight through, separating the lungs and heart from your intestinal system. So making sure that that is all going well, and then, sticking to your body work schedule. We've discussed that a few times recently. The improvements that come when you are getting body work, doing the exercises, and having someone come back to check on the system before it begins to, decline again. Not decline, but just get to a point where it needs a bit more support, and you're always just going to be improving then. What else? What else would you be talking about improving?
Yeah, well, I think function is definitely extremely important. Like you've got to make sure that you've got function to support core core development and core use, which is also what we go into in the other episodes where we discuss developing the core and exploring the core anatomy. Hoof and dental balance is going to be integral because if there's discomfort in their mouth or the way that their feet are balanced is going to affect their ability to hold up their belly. And so we that has to be number one, really, along with the gut nutrition and gut health. So it's kind of number 1 and 2 there, and then go to function. So making sure that they've got comfortable feet. So it's not always balance, like it can be the balance of the feet, but the comfort. And so often that can be difficult, and then you put boots on them. So say they're barefoot and you put boots on them and then you see, oh, now they can engage their abdomen. So sometimes it's not that obvious until you provide the comfort. And then saddle fit, absolutely, if you're going to be riding your horse, you need to look at your function and your comfort, and then the saddle comfort and function, how that enables the function of the back and the core. But the biggest thing is that we need to promote more movement. And horses that are pretty sedentary, i.e. standing at a round bale and eating all day, is not going to be conducive to helping reduce a pendulous abdomen. So we need to promote movement in their paddock. We need to promote exploration and presence in their movement so that they can actually be aware of how they're moving. And we need to create variation in movement. So, I'm guilty of this, but too many of us get in the habit of just doing the same thing, so you have an arena, so you go in the arena every day and you do the same things. And we can get caught up in that. So, like jumping people don't like doing flat work, some of them, and dressage people don't like doing jumping, and you're kind of doing a disservice to your horse there because unless there's a physical reason why they shouldn't do a movement, so like jumping, I don't know, there's some reason the reason that I wouldn't jump Jelly, A, is because his muscles have to be in a good place to deal with it, but B is because my body does not like it, so it could be a beneficial thing for him to a degree, but I really struggle with that physically. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't do a little bit on the long rein, doing little kind of cavaletti type stuff. So we want to promote that variation, so we can promote it in our training by incorporating things like muscle activations, mobilizations, varied terrain. We often just train on one terrain, like just in the sand arena or just in the paddock. But horses, if we can go sand, paddock, grass, road, like different surfaces, having to step over certain obstacles and things like that, they're getting so much change in the way they have to stabilize. Poles in hand versus on the long rein versus 2 reins versus ridden. You can easily create variation even if you only have one space by incorporating these different things. And, we were talking about this just before we began, and I was like, which horses have I seen that have the best abdomen? Well, it's often horses that trail ride, so they're stepping over things, their terrain varies, they have, unless they've done too much, too steeper hills, too much hills, too many kilometers, that sort of thing, but, they have the most variation. And I had a friend come over a couple of months ago with her horse, she was passing through, and I was like, geez, your horse actually has core strength. I was like, and she's a ABM practitioner, so I was like, I know, it's amazing. She's mostly trail riding that horse. She does a bit of cantering uphill and obviously a bit of treatment of the horse and things like that. But I was like, yes, that's that's it. That's core strength. Like, her back looked great, her belly looked great, she looked fit, like a horse, they look fit. But no matter how much work you do, if they don't have abdominal comfort or they don't have biomechanical comfort and function, then you're going to just be creating fatigue. But also, we can promote movement in the paddock. So my horses they have lots of different feeding positions. I don't just put all their hay in one position. They get their hay nets in different positions, sometimes higher, sometimes lower, sometimes on the ground. They have to walk, like their hay is nowhere near the water. So they have to walk from their hay in the water. And if I put it on the ground and it's not all dry, then I spread it out. So I'm actually promoting movement. I don't just put their hay in one position. So it's easy, just all of those things, or I feed them on the slope, or, promote some movement that I don't have to physically do. Or I can't ride them, so you take them for a walk, up and down some hills and stuff. It's great for you as well. So, yeah, really think about those sort of aspects. How can I just promote varied movement in my horse? And how can I make sure that my horse is getting appropriate fiber, appropriate protein, and has appropriate functional capacity to improve their core strength. Definitely go back and listen to Erica's podcast on nutrition. It was very beneficial.
Definitely. I'm just thinking, the idea of when you have your function and then bringing in movement. I saw a horse recently who had a giant big belly, to the point, everyone makes a joke, ha ha ha, is he pregnant? It's always a running joke. Like, is that a pregnant man? No, that's just my fat and happy gelding wandering around the paddock, kind of eating too much and not doing enough movement. And I saw him and I thought, you've got this disengaged pelvis and your legs are kind of traveling a bit out behind because of it, with a big belly. But he's quite happy in himself. And when I asked him to, can you belly lift? Do you have some lateral motion through your pelvis? Can you flex your pelvis and can you extend it? And can you lift your thoracic sling? Everything was no issue. Happy face, easy motion, no jerkiness, but he had a big belly. And we basically ascertained this horse is not moving enough to even use his muscles to keep the strength there. And he was carrying some extra weight as well, so that wasn't helping him. However, if he was to be simply doing enough movement to stimulate and be using himself, he would be a very long way into having a functional posture, because he has his function available to him. So having that movement there can sometimes be the difference that you need. And I think horses at that point, there's a lot of horses who are at the point where when they have movement introduced, so he's currently just resting in the paddock, and we were seeing him to assess whether or not he was able to come back into work. At that point, if you simply slap a saddle on and race out and go into fatigue, you have a horse who was at the tipping point of the ability to come back into a balanced strength. So like a posturally sound strength training system, as opposed to getting tired and running around in his disengaged state. And so if you can grab that point that your horse is at and make progress in the direction of increasing movement at the right increase in workload without going into fatigue and not you're at a great position to have a really sound and functional horse. But then it can go the other way, because you're predisposed to overdoing fatigue, and then you do risk an injury.
Yeah, and we have to recognize at which point, because like you said, you can have function, but you've got to have strength in that function as well. So otherwise you'll end up a horse like that can't hold it. They will end up not losing that function and then end up with problems because they have poor posture. So they have function, but they have poor posture. And so they need to learn how to maintain a better posture. And some horses have had poor posture forever, and so you're not going to build that in a few weeks. It's going to take you like 6 months to build core strength that can actually hold in the paddock, especially if you're coming from nothing. At least 6 months, sometimes 12, sometimes longer than that. It just depends on everything else. So yeah, first of all, you need to think about your priorities when we're talking about pendulous abdomen. So first, does your horse have a pendulous abdomen? What is the reason that they have it? Is it gut function? Is it workload? Is it some other functional issue like hoof balance or dental balance or saddle fit or too much riding, not enough work? Like, what is the actual workload and the movement patterns of your horse? What else would you say are priorities?
To then, once you figured out the reason and you're addressing it, begin to implement the system of regular activation and use of the core and the belly through all the things we're talking about. So feeding positions, variable positions, like lots of different ways of moving, activations and postural training, and a realistic timeline. Because as you were saying, having an increase over a much longer period of time than everybody thinks. And then I would say the biggest thing is the continuation for life, because we respond to the forces placed upon us. And so once you get to that point, it's easy to maintain and it's wonderful to keep it. So increasing the type and quality of movement. Number one, it's a lifelong continuation. Any bodybuilder out there can turn into a couch potato within a few years if you are not stimulating your body and eating well and moving well.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, just consider all of those things. Make sure that they do have enough protein to support their muscle development and appropriate fiber types to also support gut health, and that they've got good microbial function to be able to utilize that fiber. It was interesting the other day, just before we finish up, as Sophie said, like, we've been super dry here, and then all of a sudden we had a lot of rain. Like, at where I live, we got like over 100 mils, and then we got a follow-up rain, and the grass is just like, I can see it growing out my window. Like, it's crazy. But Mooney, he's got a sensitive gut because he's a windsucker. He actually doesn't have a pendulous abdomen, probably because he uses his core all the time when he's sucking, and I feed him on a slope. And but anyway, he got colic the other day, and it was a spasmodic gas colic, and his belly got pendulous in that moment. I was like, geez, Mooney, you've got like a bit of a like belly happening here. And I could feel the tension on the right side of his muscles, and then I pressed the the fart button, which is like up in the next to the anus, underneath the tail there, the sacrotuberous ligament area, and released a lot of gas. And it was like I was letting out a balloon, because his belly, like, within half an hour, I also put the beamer on him. I did that. I gave him some Traumel, and then did some work to help his gut comfort. And then it was like I decompressed him. So sometimes you can get a pendulous abdomen in a short period of time when, for instance, they've eaten a heap of green grass and the gas is built up in their body, or, like they've got that build-up of sand. So I've also seen Jelly's belly get like that, and then I give him the psyllium clean out and his belly kind of comes back to normal. I've also seen it, Ellie's a younger horse, and I hadn't wormed her that frequently, and she had a bit of a parasite burden, and then I saw the difference in her belly shape after worming her, so yeah, it's figuring out, well, what's the underlying cause for your individual horse, and then exploring those aspects to then improve their ability to utilize their core. Because if their gut is uncomfortable, you can do all the core stuff you want. Like, it's like I was with a friend the other day and she ate something and her belly in half an hour just was like so fat,
Not happy.
so pregnant looking. It was pendulous, right? And it was just because of what she'd eaten, didn't agree with her gut. That can happen with horses as well. And then like the next day, you know, she has a flat belly kind of thing. So yeah, when you've got that pendulous belly look, you need to figure out what is going on here and how can I help my horse, because riding them like that is not going to help you get core strength. That it's like they've got bricks hanging under there. It makes it a million times harder to have any level of engagement if they don't have comfort for some reason. Do you have anything to finish up with?
No, except that everybody should sign up to the free Posture and Behaviour Masterclass on Wednesday, the 18th of March. The links are going to be in the show notes, and it's a fantastic opportunity to hear the anatomical and functional perspectives as to all the behaviours that plague us quite commonly, including, you know, when your horse doesn't stand for the farrier, or you've got a horse who is starting to be resistant under saddle, if they're stumbling and you just cannot seem to get them to pay attention to their own feet and stop being, you know, lazy, or they're shying and spooking. It's a really great way to get some perspective on those behaviours and how they link to posture.
Yeah, so I hope to see you there. Thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler and Sophie Vandenberg in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating so we can share more valuable insights. Reach out with any listener requests for topics that you'd like to hear us talk about. And if you're a business that aligns with our mission, then reach out to become the sponsor of an episode.
And we'll see you in the next exciting episode.